I can't tell you how often I am asked, isn't there an easier way? Isn't there a shortcut? It comes often quite elaborately clothed in lots of different words and intellectual ideas, but the question behind it is, where is the easy way? There was a gentleman friend of mine who was in my classes when he lived here. He lives in another community now, but he was here for 10 or 15 years. I always liked having him in class because he asked very interesting questions. But over time, I began to realize it was always the same question. Now tell me the secret, how it's easier, okay? Recently, I was communicating with a friend who's in another country, far away, facing very difficult times. And, periodically she writes, hoping that I'll say something else. Other than just hang in there, honey, there's no choice. This is what you have to do. What choice do you have? When Swami Kriyananda was asked by Shivani at one point, what is the secret of spiritual success? That she asked him that way back in the 70s when we were all just starting out, and it all looked a lot easier. It looks easier now than it looked then, actually. But we were naive in our expectations. What is the secret? And one of the things he said was, when you realize that there is no alternative. In other words, when you just stop waiting to be rescued, there's an enormous part of us that just holds out in the hope that I won't ever really actually have to do that, whatever that might be for each of us. I was also speaking to a friend this morning. How many of us, we arrive, you generally have to be pretty dynamic before you even consider the path of self-realization. You have to be creative enough to look at this world and to hear all the voices that are telling you so many other things except give your life to God, just about almost anything but give your life to God. Then they'll argue with you about God. It just goes on and on and on. So you've got to have something inside of you that is able to see through the intense veil of confusion which passes for human life. Forgive me for being a little cynical this morning, but it's one of those mornings. I hope to bring it up a little bit before we're done. And if not, I'm sorry. I apologize in advance. But you have to be able to think for yourself. I don't mean you have to be a creative artist. You don't have to be able to paint or dance. But you have to be creative enough to imagine another life. And as a consequence, we tend to be a rather strong-minded group, especially Swami Kriyananda's children. In some context, there's a story about Master and some man who was always rebelling against what Master said and holding on to his own point of view and would come around eventually, but finally he said to Master, "I'm so sorry that I'm so stubborn." And Master said, "That's all right, I attract stubborn people." And he meant it as a compliment. There was a gentleman who was part of Ananda for a period of time, this is many decades ago, and he started an Ananda group at a time when we didn't have very many. He just took the initiative and started this whole group, named it Ananda, without a whole lot of permission from head office. We hardly had a head office at that time. And it was my job I was a circuit preacher at that point. I would travel about and spread the news, spread the good news. And this man just kept establishing himself more and more in his own position and so on. And finally, he incorporated legally in an Ananda group and declared himself spiritual director for life. And this was way beyond my pay grade. This was the early 80s. Now I think I might be able to handle it, but at that point I didn't know what to do. "Sir," I said to Swami, "I don't know what to do here." So Swamiji invited him to lunch, and they had a long and very interesting conversation about many things on the spiritual path. And he was a very strong-minded man with a lot of strong opinions, which Swami tried to mold, but didn't really argue. He just tried to direct it. And at the end of the lunch, Swami said so kindly, he said, "Spiritual director for life of Ananda," Swami said, "that's my job." He said, "If you want that job, maybe you should use a different name." So he went home and changed the name of his organization so he could be spiritual director for life of something. But what was most interesting about the whole experience was after he walked out, after he left, we said goodbye. I was in the room the whole time, of course. I cooked lunch and served and so on. And Swami said to me, anybody with a little spunk is just going to go ahead and do what they feel to do. They're not going to wait to be told what to do. And then he said, I much prefer a man like that. You see, because that's the kind of energy that you have to have. You have to be strong in this. And many of us came to Ananda with many precious opinions of our own that Swamiji often, over periods of years, gradually dismantled. I remember a friend of mine, actually, many of you know her, Naidruva. She's a black woman. I believe she was the first black woman to graduate from Harvard Law School. And I think she was part of the first coterie of women to graduate, significant little group, but I believe she was the first black woman to graduate. She became a lawyer just because God told her to do it. This was before she knew Ananda. And she graduated at a time when Martin Luther King was still living and doing all his work. And she never got to go to the South, even though she wanted to. She was herself from New York, but they kept her in the East Coast because she could work in the law offices, because she had that skill. It was actually very interesting, just to skip ahead. When Ananda faced enormous litigation by another spiritual group that tried to use the laws of intellectual property and copyright and trademark to gain exclusive rights to Yogananda's teaching. It was very clever, but it didn't work. And she was central to that effort for us. And she said it was a creative use of law to try to get religious monopoly, which happens to be illegal in the United States. And eventually they were defeated completely. We're standing here with Master's picture on the altar, so we won in that respect. When she was working for Martin Luther King for that effort, she said they had to do the same thing. Because there were no laws favoring civil rights, but there were laws about real estate and money and all kinds of things. And they had to think creatively how it could be applied to the situation at hand, which in itself, of course, was worth doing. But she also told me years later, because she lived here, she's a good friend of mine, and she said learning how to use law creatively really served her when she was working for us, because it was the same thing. It wasn't straightforward. Very, very interesting. I say all of this to give you an idea about how strong a woman she was. She was extremely committed to certain political points of view, strong points of view that I don't even know what the words are for them now, that Swami did not share, that Yogananda did not share at all. But even to the end, if you kind of poked her on those issues, she would just come out just the way she'd always come out. After all that dedication, after all that work, after a lifetime of Ananda, it was just where she was. And a lot of times that just happens. We become committed for one reason or another, and it's very hard for us to see past whatever these are. Some of them matter, some of them don't. But now where I'm trying to come to, but we're all in the same boat. I had that issue with him constantly because I totally respected Swamiji. I mean, there was just literally from the moment I saw him to this moment standing in front of you, I never doubted him. I always knew that he knew what he was doing, and on and on and on, I can say. But I'm very strong-minded, and I come to my own opinions for good reason. So I was often caught like that, because I knew he knew more than I did, but I didn't yet understand why. But at the same time, I knew that it was death to me spiritually if I started, positing my opinions. And in his autobiography, Swami's autobiography, The Path, The New Path, he writes a chapter on attunement. That's our subject for today. For those of you who haven't read that book or haven't read that chapter recently, it's well worth going and reading it. And he comments in there, he said, one of the ways that people begin to lose their footing, spiritually speaking, is they say, oh yes, in spiritual matters, the teacher, the master, the guru, he really knows. But in this particular area, I know more than he does. That's how Judas did it. Judas was an apostle. Judas was one of the 12. He was chosen. He was a highly advanced soul. Sometimes it just becomes religion, becomes so simplistic. You don't know how to think about it. But when you go all the way back, Judas was one of the chosen to carry the light of Christ forward. But he behaved very badly. We all know Judas his name is synonymous with betrayal and everything that's terrible. But Judas had a small problem. This is how Yogananda explains it. This is how Swami explains it. He had a little problem. He was attached to money. He was also attached to status and position, and he was really impressed by people who had it. And he thought that the way Jesus could really be successful was to win the people who were in power. And he could never persuade Jesus that this is what he ought to do. Jesus just had this other idea about how things should go, and he associated with people who were not important in society, and he alienated those who were important. This was very distressing to Judas. And one of the ways that Master explains it, which is extremely interesting, is that when Judas engineered, because he played the part, he didn't cause the karma, but he played the part, engineered that Jesus would be arrested and would be tried. He never thought Jesus would be crucified. He thought that he would force Jesus to declare himself, but instead, he just surrendered and allowed himself to be crucified. Judas killed himself the very next day because it just did not work out the way he expected. But Swamiji takes that story all the way back, and he says it just started with, yes, he's a master and he has all these powers, but in this I know a little bit more. I have a PhD in this subject. I have a lifetime experience. I came from a family where I stood up and did all of this. This is the question of attunement. This is the question of, are we really accepting that there is a reality beyond the one I know? But still, you have to do it with integrity. You can't just, I remember, this is so silly, but it was really important. I used to like country music. I didn't like country music like I really listened to it. But every so often when I'd hear one of those songs about, she ran away from me, she took my dog and my truck, I liked it. I liked the story. I liked the story of it. And of course, you can imagine Swami had no interest in country music, just none. And I remember the day that I was able to say, I like it. And so just finding the point where I could just say, I like it, but without actually saying, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. If we have our own point of view, we have to also have the integrity just to stand in it. I just like it. It's something that's okay. But to say, actually, therefore, our relationship has changed, we're really different, I'll only accept you to a certain extent. And so Master writes, Swami writes, speaking of Master today, the power of attunement. Many of you will leave the path, but it wouldn't happen if you stayed in tune. That phrase has been part of the vocabulary of Ananda life since the earliest times that I can remember. And I've used it often, and I've heard people around me often, and then every so often I think, what does this actually mean? I've seen it play itself out. I can feel it in my own heart. I've watched the drama of it, but it's very, very subtle to put into words. I remember over the many decades that I've been part of Ananda, Swami would say sometimes, I'm very concerned because so-and-so is getting out of tune. That would be the phrase. And I would know exactly what he meant. In fact, in one part of that 12 years of litigation that we had to do, the attorneys on the other side, there's several ways that you can win in court, and one of them is to bankrupt your opponent so they just can't keep going. And so we were being sued by a very wealthy organization, and, well, let's just put it mildly, we are not. Okay, despite the comfort that you see around you, we just, as Ananda got increased over the years, some of the accountants who took care of the monies, they were just going bankrupt with more zeros at the end of the numbers now. Not bankrupt, but just pushing it to the edge. We've never had the luxury of, we have the luxury of generosity and dedication. And attunement actually is what brings it to us. But part of one of those exercises that would cause us to spend tens of thousands of dollars, we had to make a list of everybody who'd ever been a part of Ananda, ever, since the very beginning. And I remember looking at that list, and it was so interesting to me because of the, there's concentric circles. So there was a very peripheral circle of people who just walked in and walked out. But there was sort of about 3 circles like this. They would go toward the center. And almost no one who really moved into that, literally almost no one ever left. Once they sort of reached a certain level like this. And everybody who did, I knew why they had. There'd always been a little piece that they were holding on to. Just a little piece inside themselves of in this matter, I know better. I mean, that's Judas. In this matter, I know better. Most of us don't carry it so far. But nonetheless, that's what we're doing. We're crucifying our own attunement. You don't have to say, I understand and I agree. You don't just have to say, yes, sir, Swami criticized me. For he said, you always want to look good, so you say yes to me. But I know what you really feel. And fortunately, as I've told you before, I said I broke the right way. That's a phrase that has also been part of the spiritual life. Often you're pushed far enough that it just pushes you so far, and Master often pushes you that way. In Swami's book, The Path, he tells the story of he and Norman, who was a monk with him, a young man at that time, but a very big, strong man. They were digging a swimming pool for Master at his desert retreat. Swami said he never used the swimming pool. It was just a way to have them around. And they had to dig all this sand out and pile it up, make big piles of sand. And it was very hot and hard work. And just before lunch, Master came out and said, all those piles of sand don't look very nice. I think we should smooth them out. So he got a big 2x4, and each of Swamiji and this other man had to stand, and they had to push the sand off until it was completely smoothed out. Swami writes, I'm not sure if you can understand how hard this was to do. He said, but it was very hard. They were hungry, they were tired, and they were hot. And Master kept just saying, one more. Oh, that works well. Let's just do one more. And finally, as Swami puts it, he broke the right way. He just knew Master was just testing them, their willpower, their willingness. He broke the right way. He just started laughing. Master said, I was just having fun with you. Let's go in and have lunch. That's something really very extremely real to remember. When the pressure comes. And when Swami said to me, you never fooled me, I broke the right way. I said, what a colossal waste of time. And after that, I was frank with him. But in my heart, I always knew he was right. I just didn't know why he was right yet. That's how we have to think about it. And it's interesting because here in the very reading, the Bhagavad Gita says, those who love me wholeheartedly, who are attached to me wholeheartedly, I enlighten them. And then he uses the phrase, I give them discernment. Isn't discernment an interesting word? Discernment is to be able to tell the difference between one thing and another, between one lower truth and a higher truth, between what is really important and what is just my long-standing habit. My dear friend Naidruva, when I touched the politics, no way. There was just no way. It was her whole identity. She'd been a black woman. Not only did she break the color bar when she went to Stanford, but all of her growing up, the first black family in a neighborhood, the first black family in a high school. It was just part of her. And there was no part of her, I don't mean she was that Swami was asking her to give up her dignity as a human being, not at all. But there's a whole lot of politics and other things that come after that. And it wasn't something she could give up. But she never defined herself against the spiritual path in that respect. You can discern the difference. You can quietly in your own room listen to country music and enjoy it, or whatever small thing it might be. But don't ever cause it, don't ever allow it to become your self-definition that is stronger than being the disciple, that's stronger than being a child of God. And Master says, it needn't happen if you stay in tune. And I'm coming back to just like, what is attunement? It's who am I? What is life? And again, the Gita says, those who love me, who are attached to me, when everything else is taken away, who are we? What do we have left? Why do I live? Where do I think my life comes from? And yes, of course, we have all these confusions and weaknesses and compulsions. I have been amused by myself. I live in the community. I live in a 2-story house. The kitchen is downstairs. My bedroom is upstairs. Oh, there was a woman writer talking about procrastination when you're a writer. And because I am a writer, procrastination is a real issue. She talks about when she finally sits down to write, she's just about to start, she says, somewhere in the house a piece of chocolate is calling my name. Don't you understand that? I've been upstairs in my bedroom, it's time to go to sleep or it's time to meditate. Somewhere downstairs in the freezer is a chocolate chip cookie that is just so wants to be part of me. And I will get up and walk all the way downstairs. And these are harmless things. Swamiji once said to Master, help me to overcome my attachment to good food. Swami was very particular in what he liked to eat, and his Leela, who was his cook for 20 years, she was superb at what she could do. She knew exactly what she wanted. In fact, it was so sweet. On her birthday in 2012, she cooked dinner. She took off her apron, she hung it up. The next day she went to the doctor and she was riddled with cancer. And I think she already knew it. She lay down and just a little over a month later she passed away. But even when she was on her deathbed, I remember her saying about the person who was trying to help fill in to cook for Swami, he doesn't like broccoli. Tell them that don't cook him any broccoli. It was just so, just so sweet. But Swami was very particular, and she did exactly what he wanted. But he said to Master, help me overcome my attachment to good food. He says, when ecstasy comes, everything goes. So don't become over-scrupulous. That's what the Catholics call it, over-scrupulosity. I remember falling into that, where all of a sudden you just get so paranoid. I have to do this because God won't like it if I don't, and God will like it if I do. And I remember I just got so snarled up in my mind. The Catholics who've been at this for a long time know how this all works. You start being a good monk, and then you try to be a better monk, and then you try to be a better monk, and finally you're so stiff you can hardly love at all. And Swami's saying to me, Asha, God doesn't necessarily want you to be unhappy. He said, that's your idea. And it's sort of like, oh, all right. So attunement isn't like that. Attunement is because we love. You just come back to the word love, who are attached to me in love. When you love someone, you don't work at it. It's just what you always think about. Your mother has a new baby, she can't turn her mind away from the baby for a second. Papa comes home from work and the little toddler runs. I watched this scene that I could see from the hill at Ananda village. Papa was over here, child about 6 was over here, and I could see the whole scene because I was on the hillside. Child screams, "Daddy, Daddy," comes running across this whole thing and just propels herself into his arms, knowing full well that she'll catch him. I thought, whoa, how do you ever be detached from that? No chance at all, and no point even in trying. You know, you just love God through it. Love God beyond it. Love God in everything. That's the whole message. And all wisdom comes from that. Because I love God, because I love God in everyone. Everything else follows from that. It's not complicated. It's what does Divine Mother want from me? It's not who did what to whom and why are they treating me this way and that way, which is so easy to do. Why is the world the way it is? Why did God make it? Why are those terrible people in charge? What am I afraid of? No, it's just, all right, Divine Mother. All right, Master. Here I am. I have one purpose. I'm here to be your instrument in this world. What do you want from me? After all the dust settles, what do you want from me? Ask that question. How can I serve? How can I love? How can I be your instrument? That is attunement. And then you will stay on the path forever, because where could you go? What choice do you have? This is who I am. God bless.